Well, growing up, I would spend several summer weeks with my grandparents who I adored. They had a beautiful home in Oklahoma on Grand Lake, centered in a fisherman's resort that they had built from scratch. They owned and operated. And the locals who lived there, it was a community where everyone knew everyone. They were always friendly towards guests who had come to fish and camp and just get away. People from all over the country would come there. And one of the different things about my grandparents' home was that unlike most homes where as a visitor or a guest you would go to the front door, at my grandparents' house there was actually a side door that was right underneath a giant attached carport that people would go to. And if it was daytime, my grandpa and grandma would almost always have the main door open, so you had just the glass storm door, and from the outside it was just a straight view into my grandparents' kitchen and into their dining table, where my grandparents, who were semi-retired at that point, where they would often be sitting. And then throughout the day, many times, get this, people would stop by unannounced and knock. And clearly seeing my grandparents sitting there at the table without hesitation, my grandfather would just happily holler at whoever was knocking on their door to come on in. And if there wasn't one hot and fresh already, my grandma would immediately get up and get a pot of coffee going and ask if they were hungry. And grandpa would enthusiastically tell whoever had stopped by to just sit down and take a load off. And then in the insanity of it all, they would sit there and visit about weather, fishing, life, whatever. There was often laughter, and my grandparents, who clearly didn't understand how rude it was, loved it when anyone ever stopped by, whether they knew they were coming or not. And to make it worse, a cardinal rule at my grandparents' home was nobody ever leaves our home hungry, which might be why they couldn't get their arms around one another. But countless times, I observed my grandma cook up an entire meal for an unannounced guest with a genuine smile on her face. But that was another time, right? I mean, today, can you imagine showing up at somebody's house unannounced, or at your home, all of a sudden the doorbell rings or there's a knock at your door? What do? Like, be honest. Most of you, first off, you look surprised, and then you begin interrogating everyone in the house. Did you invite somebody over? Did you know somebody was coming over? But you don't say it too loud because you don't want the door knocker to hear you that you're there, because you don't know if you want them to know you're home yet. You start flagging everyone in the house down to be quiet and shushing your kids, and your wife is army crawling across the floor so she can peek out and see who's there. Or those of us with like Ring or Blink cameras, like pulling up on our app to see who's there. You know, friend or foe, Mormon or Jehovah's Witness. And even if it's someone we know, it's like, oh my gosh, my house is a mess, or I've had such a hard week, I don't know if I have the emotional energy for whoever's at the door. And even when it's people that we know coming over, for many of us, it's like life is just so busy and demanding and crazy, and we're stretched so thin, and it can feel like work just to have people over, especially having a guest over for the first time, right? I mean, we look around the house, and it's like, oh my gosh, I can't have them see what a slob I really am. And so we got to clean up, and we pick up, and we feel compelled to declutter and to make sure that people aren't tripping over things, and to create cleanliness and create order. And we need to make sure there's enough food, that there's good food and something to drink, and where will people sit. And here's where I'm headed with this. And this may be enough for some of you to feel like that's reason enough right there to not follow Jesus. That in the New Testament, Jesus portrays himself as one standing outside a door, your door, knocking, saying, hey, open up, let me in. And this is important. In this particular text that we're going to look at, this is actually being written to Christians, to church people who believe in God, who believed in Jesus, who were just doing life, but in doing everything they were doing, they completely missed the one who was supposed to be the central figure to everything in their deal. And if you heard this verse growing up, you likely heard it in the King James, which in the King James is behold. But in the NIV, it's, here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in. And now, some of you have heard this passage before, but let's pretend that you hadn't. What would you fill in that blank with? That I will come in and do what? What do you... If I, Jesus, will come in and blank, what would you fill in the blank with? What would you assume Jesus wants in for? See, I would probably assume, because of my temperament, I would fill in the blank with, I will come in and I'm going to rearrange your messy morals, priorities in your life. Or I will come in and give you an earful about how long you kept me out there and kept the door shut and didn't let me in. Let me in so that I can tell you how short you fall and what a sinner you are. In fact, one of the reasons some people are so resistant to Jesus is they're afraid of what he's going to say or what he's going to do if they actually let him in. But what he says next is it's the jumping off point, and it sets the direction for the next several weeks that we have together. This is so important. What Jesus says next is unexpected, and as I'll explain actually on the back end, even suspect. Jesus says, if anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and I will dine with them. In the old King James, I will sup with that person and they with me. Which sounds a little weird to us, but in this culture, there was probably nothing more intimate that he could have tagged on to the end of this verse. And see, whether you're an exploring skeptic or you're a convinced follower of Jesus, no matter how much we read or listen to talks and podcasts or sermons, when it comes to God, one of the things that most of us totally miss is that from day one of Genesis to the final end of Revelation, it's actually quite clear, if you're looking for it, that you and I have a God whom Jesus characterized as a heavenly Father who desires relationship with you and with me, an actual relationship that is characterized by intimacy. That his priority for your life and mine is to not come in and slap us around and manipulate us and stop this and stop that and here are 10 more things for you to do. He's saying if you'll ever open the door to your life, to your singleness, to your whole life, to your career, your relationships, your marriage, your parenting, your finances, your time, your heart, mind, body, and soul, all of it. Jesus says, all I want is relationship. A relationship characterized by a knowing of one another, an experiencing of life together, of intimacy. But for most of us who believe there is a God, even for those of us who believe in the God of Jesus, if we were completely honest, that isn't how we would characterize our experience, at least most of the time. For most of us, when it comes to God, it's honestly more of a head thing. It's more of an intellectual or an ethereal thing. I mean, there are things that I believe, and then there's some things that I wrestle to believe, so there are some things that are hard to understand and to reconcile, and yes, sometimes I feel things, but for the most part, we end up settling for a data-based, mind-level, intellectual faith. And as a result, we end up missing out on the one thing that God has gone to great lengths to create for us, and that is the potential to experience God in relationship through the Son. And as ethereal and intangible and as weird as the imagery might be of Jesus knocking on the door as it may sound, most of us know actually what it means to have God sort of knock on the door of our heart. Most of us have experienced a time, maybe as a child or as a teenager or as a young adult, maybe at the level of your conscience, you just kind of felt this pressing or this prompting to address or to change the behavior or to have a different worldview, see the world differently than culture. That's God knocking on the door of your heart. And most of us have had things that we holler back to the door. Mine was, come back later. Come back when I'm older. Come back when I have fewer options. I've shared my story, and especially from the ages of 14 to 19, my thought process was when I'm older and I've gotten all the sin out of my system, then come back, because then I can be a good Christian. And some of you may still be saying that. It's like, thanks for stopping by, Jesus, but things are fine. Okay, I've got things under control. Besides, if I let you in, you might mess things up. Like I'm single, and if I let you fully in, then you're going to try to change things, or I'm making a decent income, so come back. In fact, come back when the bottom drops out. In fact, when the bottom drops out, then I'll be the one to step outside the door, open the door, and be yelling, hey, come on in, because now I need your help. And then there are some of us, and I've been guilty of this, and like I'm a pastor, so I'm supposed to be like a professional Christian, right? And if left unchecked, here's what I find myself saying. Jesus, I really don't have time to just sit and dine, okay? I've got stuff to do. I mean, I have stuff to take care of, like all this stuff that you blessed me with, God, okay? I've got this great wife, I've got kids, I've got grandkids now, and I've got my church, I've got my church family, and all these things that need to be done, and people that I need time to spend with, and there's my aging parents, and this home to take care of that you blessed me with, and I've got this body that is not getting any younger, age and gravity, God, you put it in place, so I need to be exercising and spending time eating healthier meals, and God, you still haven't taken away my OCD, so everything has to be super clean and super tidy and everything in order, and the yard needs to be mowed, and there's straight lines, and there's no leaves on the grass, and I hate to say it, but I just don't have time to sit and dine. There's too much to do. So I'm just like many of you. We make up all of these excuses why we don't have time for God, and our tendency is to keep Jesus on the other side of the door. And yet there's something inside of you and inside of me that if there's a God, if the God of Jesus is the real deal, there's something in us that longs for it, that longs for answers, that longs for understanding, longs for connection, longs for intimacy. And for intimacy being to be fully known and fully accepted without any fear of rejection. Where you know everything there is to know about me, and yet you love and accept me anyways. That's what intimacy is. Now, some of us, we've experienced the crushing experience of fully pulling back the curtain of our life, making ourselves fully known to another person, only to have them walk away or reject us, or even worse, betray that trust. They rejected you. And so the fact is that in life, many of us, we projected an image. And the image of ourselves is accepted, but deep down we live with this fear. If they really knew me, all of me, they would not still love me and still accept me. So we spend a lot of time in image management, and we never experience acceptance at the deepest level because we're afraid of taking the risk to really put ourselves out there as we really are. And yet it is in every one of us to long for a relationship that is confident and fearless, knowing that the one we love will never reject us, abandon us, or desert us. But our dilemma is the only person who would ever be able to fully know you with every single minuscule wart and flaw and bruise and dark side, the only one that could know all of the things that you and I keep locked away deep inside of you because you're just too afraid or too ashamed to bring them to light, even to the person that is closest to you. The only one who is already fully aware of all of that, we shut out on the other side of the door because we're afraid of what he might say or what he might do, or that it'll be a waste of time. So if you have a Bible or Bible app, I'll invite you to go with me to the first book of the Old Testament, Genesis chapter 1, and we're going to look at one verse in the book of Genesis and one verse in the book of Revelation, because these two verses serve as bookends for this whole series that we're starting today. A series that has the potential to significantly impact your day-to-day life experience, because life is complicated. And what we're going to discover over the next few weeks has the potential to take you from just knowing things about God to experiencing God, which will, by association, impact even the seemingly mundane details of your busy, demanding, complicated day-to-day life and relationships. And I am right there in this with you. So I am selfishly doing this also for me. So Genesis chapter 1, beginning in verse 26. Moses tells us, "Then God said, 'Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds of the sky and over the livestock and all of the wild animals, over all the creatures that move along the ground.' So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And then God blessed them." Now let me ask, what had they done so far to deserve a blessing? Nothing. God's like, I just want to bless you. And then he ascribes to them the responsibility for this earth that he has for the entire universe. And what we discover from day one, and it's why we're doing this series, is that God created mankind in relationship, for relationship, with himself and with one another. Now, let me say this. If you are a rational human being who struggles with the idea of a first man and a first woman running around naked in the garden, I get it. Very fairy tale-like. Let me tell you why I believe that Adam and Eve were real people. Because Jesus did. And the historical evidence is overwhelming that this man, Jesus, did in fact predict and pull off his own death and resurrection. And when somebody predicts and pulls off their own death and resurrection, I, just as a simple guy, just conclude, I think I can trust whatever they say. And Jesus clearly believed that these two humans were real. And this whole thing of being made in the image of God, it can feel confusing, but a parallel would be that my sons, and I have 4 of them, my sons are not me, but they're part of me. My son's daughter is not him, but she is a part of him, and thus a part of me. And in the same way, you're not God, but there is a part of you that is a part of him, and a part of him that is a part of you. He made us as much like himself in a physical body as he possibly could. That very much like a couple who intentionally decides to do the thing that, if we're honest, and I'm guilty of this, it defies all logic and all reason to have a child. Okay, to create a noisy creature that is going to hijack the mom's body and brain and bring about untold hours of sleeplessness, butt wiping, diaper changes, financial burden, and potentially heartbreak. And when you boil it down to the irreducible minimum, what is the ultimate motive for most couples who try to become parents? Relationship. In love, seeking to create a small human in relationship for relationship, just like God, the Father. That God, the perfect prototype Father, created us in relationship for relationship. And just to maybe shift your paradigm just a little bit, do you know what that makes the collection of ancient documents that we call the Bible, the Biblia, the books? This makes the Bible a dynamic, epic love story. The epic Genesis story about God the Creator, whose prized creation broke trust, destroyed intimacy, and brought about untold death, pain, destruction, with the rest of the Bible being about God going to extraordinary lengths to restore what was broken. That's what the Bible is. To put it simply, the Bible is the epic story of redemption, of God doing everything in his power to save us from the consequences of our choosing to break trust and to reestablish connection with mankind, with you and with me. But that begs the question, why? Why would he do that? Because deep in the heart of God, he's never desired mindless, soulless rule keepers. I mean, in that case, he would have done what we do. He would have created smart devices, computers, and robots. Things hard-built and hardwired to do exactly what they're told, and even with current technology, create the illusion of connection and the illusion of relationship. So instead, he creates humans in intimate relationship for intimate relationship. And God has never changed his agenda. Now, this next verse, I'm going to tell you, it is an anchoring verse for me. It has been for decades. Especially in the moments of my life where the world or the future just feels utterly discouraging or overwhelming. It is on the opposite side of the Bible in the book of Revelation chapter 21, and it's verse 1. Now, here's the context. At this particular time, in this vision that's been given by the Apostle John, I'm not going to give all the details around that, but this is a vision that God is giving him of the final end. Jesus has come, he rose, he redeemed the world, Armageddon's happened, the final discharge of Satan has happened. All of this is done with, and now God finally puts it all back together the way he always desired and intended. Look at what this verse says. And let me say, if you're someone who struggles to believe that this is true, you should at least want it to be true and hope it's true. He says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth, with all of its brokenness and pain and suffering, has passed away. And there was no longer any sea." So there's this imagery of no more borders or separation or division among humankind. "And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and He will dwell with them, and He will be their people, and God Himself will be with them and be their God.'" And in other words, after all of these thousands and thousands of years of history, finally God pushes restart. He creates everything new with none of the brokenness, and He reestablishes the context for intimacy between Himself and His prized creation with you and with me. And we're told that after thousands and thousands of years of men and women experiencing untold pain and suffering and injustice, that He will wipe every tear from their eyes. When was the last moment when you were in pain and someone was so comfortable and close enough to you to reach out their hand to your face and wipe a tear from your eye? This is not a stranger. This is a relationship. That's someone who cares that your heart is broken. So in the context of a creator and creation, could there be anything that speaks any louder of intimacy than that? That's the picture of empathy, the empathy, love, and intimacy that God desires with you and with me. That's not something that you have to wait the rest of your life for, but when you get up tomorrow and start your day, and the day after that, and the day after that, that He wants to do the day with you as you do school or relationship or work or marriage or parenting, that He's doing it with you. That He isn't busy, preoccupied, got bigger things to take care of in the world, God. He isn't big, scary, "I'm going to get you," God, but is the perfection of Father God, who loves you so much that in those tender moments when you're struggling or stressed or hurting, that He would have the relationship and the proximity to reach out His hand and wipe the tear from your face. Now here's our problem. Most of us were raised in some kind of culture that predispositions us towards what God is like, and different church cultures do things differently. They do all kinds of religious things, and yet so many never connect intimately with God. For example, the background with my family was Southern Baptist. I have many Southern Baptist friends. The message typically in that context is that God may love you, but He does not like you. So when the Baptists in my life had a problem or they sinned, once again, they would walk the aisle to the front of the service, and they would promise and rededicate, and they would commit, "I'm going to do things better." And the whole religious experience just becomes trying harder and confessing sin, and trying harder and confessing sin. Because surely that's what God wants. God's going, I just want to sit down and be quiet with you. I know a lot of Methodists through the years, and their deal typically is they're very busy helping other people and being very socially active and building habitat houses and taking meals to shut-ins, which is great. But then you start asking them about their personal relationship with Christ, and then they'll tell you about all the things that they do and how their energy is focused on like checking these boxes of having all this good social activity, but there's no experiencing or intimacy of God. Or for many of my charismatic friends through the years, my wife and I actually met in an Assemblies church. The experience is I want to go to a service, or I want to go to an event, and I want to feel something. But if you ask about intimacy or a relationship with God, they're like, "Oh, well, let me tell you about a service. And let me tell you about a feeling that I have. Let me tell you about the emotion I felt." And like, you've got to have a visible gift for any of it to count. And they spend a lot of time doing religious things and having religious experiences, and yet they miss out on just simply being with and experiencing intimacy, the intimacy that God wants us to experience with Him. Or my Catholic friends through the years and people I've talked to, I've heard a lot about Mary, their favorite saint, and confession. The Pope, and how they spend hours and hours through the years of doing lots of religious stuff as a Catholic, and yet never connect intimately with our Heavenly Father. I think we would all agree that Mother Teresa did amazing, amazing humanitarian work, compassion work in her life. And yet in her secret letters that were released after her death, she writes how it shows that she spent almost 50 years without sensing the presence of God in her life. Mother Teresa writes how she often felt alone and abandoned by God. And she wrote that she wanted the darkness of God's withdrawal to end. Now, obviously, that's not every Catholic or every Methodist or every Southern Baptist, but you know something, there's a culture, just like there is in every segment of religion. We can say, stay busy, 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 doing life, even doing church stuff and religious things, and completely miss out on God. For some people, what they tend to hide behind is, or what you may tend to hide behind, is a bad church experience. That anytime somebody brings up church, you like to tell that story that you've told forever that kind of shuts them up, and for years and years, you tell the same whole old story as if that somehow gives you a big cosmic pass on everything related to God and Christianity. There's another group that we're going to hit on a little bit next week, a group who in high school or maybe a college freshman class, a teacher told you you can't trust the Bible, it's just literature, it's myth, and it's full of errors, and anytime Christianity or church or the Bible comes up, you revert back to your college freshman notes, or there's pain, evil, and injustice in the world, and if there's a good God, well, there can't possibly be pain, evil, and injustice, and you've got these 3 or 4 little arguments that you toss out like a grenade to just blow up the Christians and make them retreat, but in the end, all you've done is chosen to isolate yourself from the God who created you, who knows everything there is to know about you and still loves you. Isolated yourself over something your college professor told you that you don't remember anything else that he taught you. All of us have a way, if we want to, of avoiding intimacy with God. Yet it's in your soul and in mine to want it, to need it, to hunger for it. And Jesus says, if you ever just open the door, I just want to dine with you. Now, some of you could rightly push back and say, okay, Chad, you're not giving us the whole picture. This isn't good teaching. Listen. Okay, so I've listened to enough sermons, I've read enough of the Bible, and there's a lot of do's and there's a lot of don'ts. I mean, have you seen how thick the Bible is? Here's all I want you to hear this morning. Everyone, all of the thou shalts and the thou shalt nots are presented within the context of a relationship with God. Yes, there are some rules, there are some watch outs. Yes, there are some single things, there are some marriage things, there are some parenting things, there are some financial things. Yes, there are some important principles and guidelines and parameters. But consider this for just a moment. Isn't that a part of any worthwhile relationship? Whether God's in the picture or not. I mean, if you're married, don't you have some do's and don'ts and principles and expectations as to this is how we have integrity in our marriage, this is how we do marriage, like we don't lie to one another, we don't cheat on one another, we don't intentionally harm one another, and then if you're a parent, like isn't your relationship and how you relate to your child guided by some do's and don'ts and some foundational parameters and principles that you have? So of course, in relationship to God, there's all of that too, but this is all within the context of all of your faults and warts and bruises, your dark side, your past sin, your future sin, your intentional sin, your not intentional sin. God says, I have paid a very, very high price to remove the sin issue from between us. So don't run away. Don't lock the door. Just open the door. I mean, one day Jesus is walking and he looks up in a tree and there's Zacchaeus, and because he was a wee little man was he. Everybody hated Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector. He was a thief, a criminal, and a traitor to his people. He hangs around with prostitutes and other tax gatherers, and he got up in the trees because he was too short. He couldn't see Jesus. And remember what Jesus says to him? He says, come down. Well, where are we going? We're going to your house. Well, what are we going to do there? We're going to have a meal. And when the meal was over, Zacchaeus emerged a changed man. I mean, you heard of Matthew? Jesus is walking along, and there's Matthew, the tax collector, collecting taxes. He's a traitor to his people. The disciples, I guarantee you, they wanted to spit on him as they passed by. And Jesus looks, says, Matthew, come with us. His disciples are like, well, he's a tax collector. All of his friends are prostitutes and tax collectors. Jesus says, yeah, that's true. Come on, Matthew. He gets up, follows Jesus. Well, where are we going? Glad you asked. We're going to your house. Well, what are we going to do there? We're going to have a meal. And I want you to invite all of your tax-collecting, sinner, marginalized, far from God friends so that I can share a meal with them too. And Matthew emerges a changed man. Jesus is saying, listen, I just want you to eat with me. I just want you to be with me and me to be with you. I want you to experience me. And I want to experience life with you. The entire time I've been talking this morning, in the forefront of my mind is years ago, being in the countryside in West Africa, where for 2.5 weeks my son and I were working to build a hospital in an area of villages populated by over 250,000 men, women, and children that had no access to medical care. So we had a lot to do in a short period of time. And one morning, the aged, weathered, deeply respected patriarch of this Ghanaian family that was leading the effort, he came and he asked me to join him on the patio of the home that we were staying at. So I went out with him, and on a small table there was awaiting us 2 cups and a ceramic pitcher with coffee in it. And he sat down and he instructed me to sit, so I did. And then he just casually poured me a cup of coffee and then one for himself. And then he just sat back and he just looked over the beautiful flowers in the tilapia pond in the courtyard, and then he started telling me about the various plants. And like the typical average time-conscious white American, I was so anxious to get to work, but I also wanted to respect him and to please him, so I started talking to him about all I had accomplished the day before and all I hoped to accomplish at the hospital build that day, and at the building site, when suddenly he grinned, and while still just looking over the pond, he just raised his hand and interrupted me. And in his thick African accent, which I am not going to attempt, he says, Brother Chad, in America you have watches. In Ghana we have time. There will always be more tasks. There will not always be more time. Right now the most important thing is for 2 men to just sit and share stories and enjoy the company of one another. And he was right. When it comes to Jesus, yeah, there are some do's and don'ts and changes, but that's not first on God's agenda. See, we get it backwards. And why wouldn't we? I mean, every day from birth, we live and function and operate in a world where we are constantly having to try and win and earn respect and trust and even love. To be able to advance, to fit in, to succeed, to win someone's love and affection. But with God, it's totally reversed. God loves us before we ever do a thing, good or bad. And that love is established, immovable, and unchanging, no matter what we do, good or bad. But as we pursue experiencing God, one of the natural outcomes of that relationship is that we're changed. Our words, our behaviors, our values, our worldview, they are transformed by that relationship. Just like the natural outcome of 36 years, 8 months, and 4 days of relationship with an amazing woman I get to call my bride has had a direct transformational impact on who I am as a man. Just like any relationship. An intimate relationship with her has made me a better man. An intimate relationship with God makes your life better and makes you better at life. So, here's my end game for you and for me as we do go through this journey together in the coming weeks, that by the time we're done, and for the weeks and years to follow, that you and I would experience something far greater, far more helpful, far more transformative than just a head intellectual knowledge and faith. And for you and I to experience God in such a way that it has a ripple effect into every area of our life and relationships. And for the next 2 weeks, actually, because we're not having service next Sunday, the Sunday after Thanksgiving, but for the next 2 weeks, I just have a simple assignment for you. And that is that over the next 2 weeks, if you don't already have one, I want you to plan, for lack of a better term, each day a quiet time. Specifically, just a period of 15 minutes each day where you are alone, unplugged, and unreachable. Now, having been the parent of small humans, I know that seems impossible, but I'm telling you, if you tag team, you work together, you can make this happen. 15 minutes. More if you want to or can. Here's all I want you to do. To just sit or kneel in quiet solitude and just say or pray something along the lines of these words. Lord, I come to you just as I am. I'm not going to read anything, promise anything, confess anything. I just want to know you. He's knocking at the door of your heart, and he wants in, not to crush you or break you or manipulate you or try to get you to do 15 more things. He just wants to know you and for you to know him. And just like Zacchaeus and like Matthew, if he ever gets in, if you ever have that kind of encounter, your life will change. There's a second thing I just want to get you thinking about as we move to the new year. As I addressed in our last series, one of the reasons that so many Christians unfortunately miss the mark when it actually comes to being like Jesus is because they are either ignoring or ignorant, they just don't know what Jesus actually taught. His original content, posture, and mission, and how it all fits into the larger narrative that we're going to be talking about. And as we enter the new year, I'm going to invite all of you to join me in a bit of an adventure, and that is to journey through the entire Bible in 1 year. The beginning January 1, that we would do it together as a community. I'm going to show you 2 or 3 great ways to do that. I'm going to really go after one where we can really do it with a specific Bible app where we can experience it together. But if you're willing to commit to this, I promise, you are going to learn things that you never knew, and you're going to be reminded of some important things that maybe you've forgotten. And this will play an important role in helping you to truly know and experience God, maybe like never before. Because just like everyone else in your life whom you love and trust, you're able to love and trust them. Why? Because first you got to know them. He wants to be known. And for you to simply come as we are with no fear, no pretending or promises or even confessions, to just, here I am, just as I am. I reached out to Zan and requested that the band do something a little different this morning. There's an old hymn that was written in 1835 by a woman named Charlotte Elliott. And the song title is Just As I Am. And for almost 200 years, and especially during the time of the Billy Graham Crusades, this song has often been sung at the end of a sermon as an invitation to give and entrust one's life to Jesus. And Charlotte had convinced herself that due to her perceived limitations, that she had nothing to offer God. And as one version of the story goes, Elliot was struck by the words of a minister who asked her whether she had truly given her heart to Jesus Christ. And she told the minister that she wanted to serve God, but she didn't know how. So he replied, "Just come to him as you are." And soon after, she wrote this song, not knowing, imagine this, that over the next 189 years, literally millions of men, women, and young people around the globe would be singing this song or having it sung while in a defining moment they put their faith, hope, and trust in Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. And you can just stay seated. You can sing along if you like, you know the song, or you can just listen to these words in an older English, but now knowing the source. That a person just like you and just like me wrestled with the idea that God, knowing all there is to know about me, would still know, love, and accept me. And that through relationship somehow use me in the lives of other people in this broken world.